Football is a really, really important tool to bringing people together.
Football is life, football is community, football is diversity. It is a lot more than a 90-minute match.
Nothing else gives you that. No other sport, no other activity gives you what football can give you.
What you have is a really fierce loyalty to the club as an institution that provides a very strong bonding point that is incredibly useful and incredibly powerful.
Scottish football particularly is a real vehicle for change. You know, there's not many places that brings whole communities together, and there's not many places that have got such an engaged audience.
It's a really important arena of social expression, always has been, but now it's really coming to the fore at a really good time.
I think people like to run with certain agendas, and football fans are easily marginalised. I believe there's a kind of fire in the belly, and there's a bit of fight back that this isn't the way we should be treated, so we're going to stand up and be counted, allow our voice to be heard.
Almost a decade removed from the offensive behaviour bill, and I think that has definitely left a scar in a lot of ways. It brought to the fore a lot of issues about criminalisation, and I think a lot of damage was done in that time period. One of the things that I find so interesting about the criminalisation of football fans is how it ties to issues about social class and the kind of class-based nature of a lot of these policy initiatives and who they are targeted at.
Offensive Behaviour at Football Act was a perfect example. You know, that you're treating football fans totally differently from anyone else in society. So something can be a crime at the football, but it wouldn't be a crime if it happened in a high street. I mean, that's utterly ridiculous.
You become so used to it. Even football fans that are the younger generation, they're now going to grow up and this is going to be the norm. It's kind of what you're born into. But what's important that you don't do with the norm is you just accept it as is. That's what I like about football fans. There's a fire in the belly that I'm not going to accept what is put on us here. I'm going to fight back, but I'm going to do it in a way that's positive.
The disproportionality of it almost in terms of football as a leisure activity, but it attracts such mass political interest and policy response. What you see is a co-construction through kind of policy, but also through kind of the media and how those co-construct this stereotype of the drunken, violent football hooligan, and how that image for all football culture has changed a lot over the past 40 years. That representation of dangerous, drunk, violent football fans is kind of stuck a lot. I think that misses the actual reality of what football clubs represent, the kind of community organisation that you see a lot through football clubs as well, and I think that is often missed in a lot of the mainstream narratives about football hooligans and football ultras and these kind of groups that are the mainstream representations of football fandom in the UK, but also specifically Scotland.
I think once the media has decided on a narrative, it's really hard to change. So with football fans, if they're seen as working class, it's easier and better to paint them with a brush as unruly and people that need to be controlled, harangued, put back in their box, and just essentially taken care of in a way that makes them feel like they can't express themselves, because the last thing they want is football supporters to get a good reputation and then to feel like they can express themselves and to feel that they have got a voice. It suits the mainstream narrative of football fans being unruly, working class, uneducated, just want to drink 10 pints, have 3 lines of coke and get in a fight, because if they treat them as a group that's worth listening to, some of the things they'll say is probably going to be counter to the narrative of the government of today.
We show up on a Saturday and we maybe don't like the opposition fans and we're wanting one over them, but when you actually isolate it and you look at it from a perspective of people and individuals, I believe Scotland as a whole and Scottish football as a whole, there is a lot more to it than is put out there. There is a lot more positives. People don't want to see others fall on hardship. Football is a place that we can come and we can turn off from our problems and our woes. So it was just quite nice to know that we show up here on a Saturday or a Sunday or midweek, but we're not different for each other just because we support different football teams.
I think one of the really interesting things that the Offensive Behaviour Act inadvertently did was create kind of a supporter identity. The Offensive Behaviour Bill created kind of a united front for football supporters in Scotland to mobilise against. It did do a very good job of challenging a lot of the negative stereotypes about the stupid, violent, uneducated football fan. Large-scale protests, lots of fan displays and activism, but it was entirely peaceful protests as well, which again worked to challenge a lot of the assumptions and stereotypes that people have about football fans. So a lot of interesting points of activism activism were kind of developed through that piece of legislation?
People say football is a very working class sport. Unfortunately, journalists and politicians see football fans in a certain light, and it's certainly not true. You know, the work that we do at this football club shows that there's so much more to those football fans. It shows that there's a caring, compassionate side to them. You know, and unfortunately, they've been tarred with a certain brush. And the way that fans came together from all walks of life and from all different football clubs to fight back in that was remarkable, in my opinion. It was the first time that a government legislation had been overturned in the Scottish Parliament, and that was extremely significant.
One of the things that's obviously highly associated with football fans is the very tribal nature of it, that you are a fan of one particular club. What we saw a lot as a result of the fan activism from the Offensive Behaviour Bill was the abandoning almost of kind of tribal, factional football rivalries and kind of a uniting of Scottish football fans against this piece of legislation. And you could see mobilisation against the Offensive Behaviour Bill at pretty much all levels of the professional game.
Football is about unity, not just on the park where you're fighting for each other and you're fighting for your teammates, but in the stands. If there is a cause, we come together as one. And I would argue that that's very much a Scotland thing also. The community that I've thrived in and grew up in, I've been so thankful for, but Scotland as a whole and as a country, I don't actually think we appreciate how often just how lucky we actually are. And growing up with football as my sport, again, very, very lucky because it is such a unified sport.
There's nothing more powerful than football fans from all different clubs putting their scarves down and, you know, speaking up for each other. I think that speaks volumes, but there's nothing more valuable than people coming together for the common good. That would make a big difference to Scottish football, and it would make a big difference to the whole experience for fans going to the games in general.
Single purpose and unity. And the kind of suspension of football rivalries. I think it ultimately showed what football is about for a lot of people, and that being able to set aside tribal differences for the kind of greater good of Scottish football fans, but also the kind of communities and the people that were affected by that as well. Whether it's protesting criminalisation or protesting commodification, you've seen a kind of growing awareness of football supporters coming together to mobilise towards kind of progressive or socially just ends.
It's been very, very hard for many football fans to shake that tag or to shake that narrative. All you have to do is look at the excellent initiatives that they're delivering across their local communities. You know, you've got fans of all clubs in Scotland that are having Christmas toy drives, that are doing food bank collections, that are really going out there and making a difference to people in their community at those times of need. You can't super generalise any group of people, be that football fans or rugby fans or people that, you know, are into whatever they're into at the weekends. You know, it's really important to treat people as individuals.
The 2018 repeal of the Act marked a significant foundation point for the development of football fan activism. Football supporters across the country have continued to unite to address concerns within the game and using the power of football to form a mobilised response to social challenges across communities in Scotland. Dr Jack Sugden worked closely alongside the Fan Supporting Food Banks movement, which united Liverpool and Everton supporters over the right to food. With the influence and the importance of the campaign since travelling and uniting fans across Scotland.
Football fan activists were seen as a vocal minority of fans. But over the course of the last 20, 30 years, as rampant commercialisation's leaked its way into the game, you've got the 20 is Plenty campaign against the price of away tickets. There was a Fans Against Gambling ads, which has had relative success in the Premier League's committed to take back gambling ads off shirts. Against the European Super League, we saw a big response to that. That's obviously an issue within football. There's obviously avenues for activism there, and the fight against the European Super League saw that. But in terms of issues outside of football, broader issues, Fan Supporting Food Banks is an early sign of hopefully things to come, because that's a broad issue that exists outside. It's not a sport issue, it's a societal issue.
Football is a really good window, and it gives really good access to communities that can be difficult to reach or difficult to engage, where the decline of the kind of political parties of the trade union movement that used to dominate those communities, I think football has been quite a good replacement or a substitute for that, as kind of an outlet for types of politics and types of organising that would have traditionally came through trade unions or came through political parties, are now kind of coming through football clubs. And I think that's a really interesting but also a really important point to make in terms of the impact that football clubs have in some of the most stigmatised communities in Scotland.
18 months of volunteering at the pantries and the food banks and turning up at match days with the collections and stuff to try and find out what energizes these people, what's the potential here. But also, I didn't want to just wander up to people using these pantries, particularly with my accent, and be like, "You're right, do you want to tell me about your life? You know, rubbish this, isn't it?" So it involved spending time at each location for a few months, working like on the fruit and veg, for example, and then once they got to know your face, you know, name, then slowly starting to speak to people, to interview people and whatever. And that's what we did. And I did 21 and counting interviews, long interviews with fan supporting food banks in Liverpool, Newcastle, Glasgow Celtic, Dundee, Southampton, West Ham, Queen's Park Rangers, and then I went over to Belfast and interviewed someone over there, Paul Doherty, who's uniting Catholic and Protestant communities over the right to food as well. So that just shows like these are, some of these are quite intense rivalries we're talking about here. You know, in Dundee, the stadium's about 20 yards away from each other. You know, Celtic and Rangers, we know all about that. Catholic and Protestants, that rivalry goes back, but this is something that's managed to unite even them, and I think that's a really powerful story.
Scottish football particularly is a real vehicle for change. So there's not many places that brings whole communities together, and there's not many places that have got such an engaged audience. Continue to use our voice to change this community for the better, then I think that's such an important thing that we do that. You know, for me, that's equally as important as getting 3 points on a Saturday. It's so important that we can reach out to people in this community and we can be there for them when they really, really need us.
Fan supporting food banks, fellas, and I guess I'm part of that movement now, is that we'd say that we're very much a sticking plaster on a gaping wound that should be addressed by the government, right? We live in one of the 5th largest economies of the world, but we've got more food banks than McDonald's. We live in a society which is deeply unequal, and they should have the right to food. They should have the right to free school dinners if they need it. You know, that's a society we can live in. There is the money there, but we just choose not to. Community organisations and now fan groups are filling a void which should be filled by central and local government. The fan groups are papering over the cracks that they shouldn't be doing, but they're doing it anyway because there's a dire need there.
Football is like clockwork. It's a weekly thing for people. It becomes kind of a focal point of a person, but also kind of a community's kind of week. So I think that aspect of football and the routine that's built around that makes it a really ideal breeding ground for these kinds of activities, but also kind of access to people, because it's community living room in a lot of ways. It's a place where people gather and people have very strong ties to communities, to football clubs, and that recognition of the kind of political landscape that football clubs occupy is a good mobilising force.
This power of sport, this power of football, it can become a bit evangelical at times. But this is an example of where that's really taken hold, and something that is worth attention and worth shouting about. What I've learned through this process and talking to all these activists and fan groups is they can be remarkably forgiving and humble. All these groups say that they're not political organisations because hunger isn't a political issue. It's a medical issue, it's a health issue, it's a community issue, and that shouldn't be politicised. The unity is in the shared sense of common humanity that in dealing with an issue such as hunger, just as it is with dealing with an issue such as loneliness, suicide, well-being. And I think that's important thing to keep hold of. Hunger essentially transcends that kind of rivalry. Talking to Paul about Catholic and Protestant kids, he said the look on their faces was the same regardless of which community you turned up in with a bag of food. As heartbreaking as that is, it's still quite hopeful, you know, in that people can recognise common humanity in each other. And that's what it is. It's about solidarity.
The solidarity of football supporters is equally reflected by the shared values of football clubs themselves, who've utilised their key stakeholder position in the community to challenge social issues within and outside of the game. However, at the elite level, a conflict arises, with once established working class institutions having to compromise between representing the community and the economic growth of commercialisation. Yet, in Scotland, clubs and supporters have resisted this trend, with supporters, football clubs and community trusts uniting behind the shared solidarity of football activism to preserve the community foundations that were central to the formation of the club itself. Resistance to commercialisation has ensured football clubs in Scotland can challenge and address inequality through the power of football.
Particularly clubs in their top level, professional clubs, are moving away from their local communities because that's the nature of capitalism. It's constantly looking to expand, to grow, and they're looking to expand into global markets so they can make more money off shirt sales, off pay-per-view packages, of, you know, their own TV channels, etc. You've got these kind of almost like spaceships, you know, just kind of planted in the middle of these working class communities around the countries now that are almost otherworldly. So While the badge and the values and the community foundation is a way to remain connected to local communities and identities, the practice of modern football clubs at the professional level is, I guess, inherently pulling them away from those local communities.
The commodification of the match day experience that kind of severs those ties to communities, as you have kind of the touristification of elite football. You don't have that same problem at kind of a Scottish level, even at kind of a Scottish Premiership level. Football clubs are kind of rooted in specific communities. You know, when you look at communities that have been massively impacted by deindustrialisation, whether it's Motherwell or Greenock or going down south to Sunderland or all these sorts of communities, football clubs are an anchor point for a lot of these communities.
Industrialisation of the steel community and the closure of Ravenscraig. It was the biggest employer in the town by some distance. Through that, you know, that creates that sense of belonging, that sense of being part of something. It was such a pride that people had in their job, and to take that away, you know, for some people it takes away their livelihood and their sense of purpose. So the football clubs hopefully replace that sense of purpose for many people, you know, and that's why it's so important that we continue to be there for everyone in the community at their time of need as well.
It's impacted people in my own family, but also impacted people in my partner's family as well. Her dad and his dad both worked for the steel industry. From the stories that you hear, that was obviously pretty much a massive change for the community in general. But to have somewhere where it was an employment, but it was also very much a social aspect, to take that away from a community can go one way or it can go the other. And I believe Motherwell Football Club has played a huge role in moving positively forward for what would have been really, really difficult times.
Motherwell is very much a community club. Every club in Scotland claims to be a community club, but actually to be embedded in your community and to work for your community has always been at the heart of Motherwell Football Club. It really has been that gathering point, that focal point. It's a community that's been through a lot of hard times with the decline of heavy industry, and this has always been a sort of haven where people could come and get away from all that for an hour and a half. It's right at the heart of the community.
People in this community, you know, they really look out for each other, and as far as I can remember, it's always been like that. People around here are tough, but they're also really, really kind. We're living in really difficult times, and often people can find themselves alienated or find themselves feeling quite lonely. You know, Motherwell Football Club provides a sense of belonging to so many people across this community, and I'm sure other football clubs across the country do as well. You know, it gives people a sense of hope and a sense of achievement. Motherwell's probably a leader in that as well. The
Community Trust was set up in 2011 to really develop the community aspect of the club. Everything from grassroots community teams, and they run from 2019s right up to our walking footballers, some of whom are in their 80s. Our women's walking football team had their first tournament at the weekend. We've got a power chair team, we've got a pan disability team. Motherwell was the first club to have a Scottish FA Community Development Officer. We're the first UK club outside Tottenham Hotspur to have a full-time mental health psychologist. Everyone that we can support, we will support, but we have to go beyond that.
Just after COVID, fans hadn't been in here for half a season, maybe more than half a season, and they'd paid their season tickets. So the season after that, Motherwell Football Club gave people season tickets for free had they paid it up the next season, and that's a really, really important thing for me. You know, it's shown that if we can be there in people's time of need, hopefully when they've got that money to give back in the future, the first thing they'll remember is, you know, well, Motherwell were there for me when I needed it, I'm going to put my money back into the club. And it breeds fans of the future as well. You know, if you're there for people when times are tough, they're not going to forget that. It's just been more than just a football club.
What's important in that relationship is the lack of judgment. We've got to earn their trust, that if they're coming to us saying, you know, it's cocaine debt, it's gambling debt, whatever that might be, they know we're not here to judge, we're here to support. We're their club, we're there for them. And if you imagine, for example, a holiday hunger programme, the parent taking their child to a football camp opposed to a food club, that's that sense of pride, that sense of dignity. There's no stigma to that. You come in, it's a football club. And football takes that away, because this is this place where you can come, where it's about Motherwell Football Club. When Motherwell are going through tough times on the pitch, the fans are always here. So when the fans are going through tough times off the pitch, that's where the Community Trust kicks in, and that's where we support the fans. And it's got to be driven by the community, not by us. You maybe think you know what people want, but you need to listen.
I think Motherwell show a great insight into what the community is needing. Motherwell, rightly so, have had a lot of plaudits in the last couple of years for the way they drive the community forward. I was very much involved with the community trust as well, and I've been able to see what they do, supporting people who are vulnerable in the community and try to engage them in something meaningful. And it was pretty difficult, to be honest, because the people that I was supporting were stigmatised and marginalised for the community, as I was supporting people with like an active addiction. But tying in with the community trust and being able to tie in with kind of street soccer as well, which was operating out of Firth Park, just shows you that actually football clubs have one of the biggest factors in the community.
Football plays a huge role in that, and I think people know they can trust football clubs because Motherwell, since 1886 has built up that trust. You're part of this community, this is a good, honest place, and I think people recognise that Motherwell in particular does have the interests of its community at heart. The Well Boys, they do a toy collection every Christmas. We do our food banks, and we all work together to do the food banks. Football supports people. Football supports people through tough times, but more people are starting to see that now. More people are shying away from things. Oh, it's hooligans. It's the working class, not the sport of gentlemen. It's a great sport, and people they look out for each other in football. And we know from our own participants, through our own projects, how much it means to people to be part of the Motherwell family.
Do we need to think critically about the need for food banks as opposed to why football clubs and football fans are doing all these grand charitable gestures? Absolutely. I think we have to ask broader political questions about the type of society we live in and whether or not we should need football clubs to take these kind of roles or to do these kinds of grassroots organising. But I think absolutely two things can be true at once, and we can be critical of the social and political and economic processes that create poverty, inequality and disadvantage, whilst also kind of celebrating the positive work that football clubs are doing and football supporters are doing within their local communities.
My own story, I tried to take my own life, ended up in hospital. Pretty difficult time in my life, things just came to a broil. Wasn't really dealing with them the way that I knew I could. I put a message out there just to say that I really wasn't doing well. Kind of just to indicate my plans really, almost as a form for me to just sign off to an extent. The reason I tweeted initially was so people knew to look at the notes on my phone, because that's where I'd left my message. I turned my phone off after sending that message. I tried to take my life, ended up in hospital after trying it for the second time, and that led to a 17-day stint in Wishaw General Hospital.
Unfortunately here in Motherwell, we've seen first hand the impacts of suicide, and it's been heartbreaking for many. I think it would be hard to find someone in this stadium that hasn't been touched by that, being known someone or having a friend or family member that's been friends with someone who's taken their own life. But the way that this club has responded to that has made me really proud to be a Motherwell fan.
A couple of seasons ago we lost a large number of fans who had sadly taken their own lives, and we work with the fans in the area of the stadium that we all know that are affected by that, and we found out what some of the triggers were for them to reach that crisis point. We've been doing some work with them to prevent people reaching that crisis point and to put signposts there. We've also done safe talk and suicide awareness training with those fans, so that there's a lot of excellent work done by Motherwell, and always has been, around about suicide awareness.
I couldn't quite believe personally the fans across Scotland, but specifically Motherwell fans, because of the community ethos, reached out to me. But not only Motherwell fans, Motherwell players that have played for Motherwell, players that have managed Motherwell's CEO at the time. That really suggests to me and really drives forward just what a community club our football club is, because to be met with a response from people you've kind of grew up loving or grew up admiring kind of blew my mind, to be honest. Like, just because we're brought together by a shared interest of a football club.
Football historically has been a predominantly male dominated environment. Males certainly of a certain age really struggle to speak up. Football clubs have got a platform here, and the way that we use it is vitally important. If we can change one person's life, or if we can save one person's life, that is invaluable, and Motherwell Football Club are playing a huge part in making that possible.
The fact that Motherwell and North Lanarkshire as a whole have been rocked by suicides, it probably did highlight that there very much was still an issue, and that work had to be done, not by Motherwell Football Club, but as a community as a whole. How do we come together? How do we openly communicate these issues, and how do we support people through them? And I believe football fans of this club really did help to strive towards making what has probably been quite a positive change in the last couple of years.
When the suicide statistic was growing in that particular season, it was an Edinburgh City League Cup tie, and there was a minute's applause, and I thought, you can't say you're a charity and just stand here and applaud. This is wrong. So I reached out to one of our trustees, is the government lead for Distress Brief Intervention Project. I reached out to Derek Watson, I reached out to a number of people, said, I don't know what I want to do here, but we have to do something. And that collective effort between Derek got us in amongst the fans and the ones that needed that most. Kevin was saying, well, this is the national direction. The club and media came on board at that point and said, right, what can we do? We trained all our community team officials, all went through Safe Talk training. They got jackets with the branding on the back. We had the branding on the back of strips, whether that was a childline number, a breathing space number. It was a collective effort. We can't have this happening in our community. This cannot be happening at Motherwell Football Club. What can we do collectively to make it better? So that all came about as a collective effort, and I think year on year the club have built on that. They've built on this what can we do to help our people when they're struggling. We have to try and find the things before they reach this crisis point, and I think the club as a whole is very, very good at doing that.
Having that first-hand experience makes it a lot more genuine. You know, people know that you're doing it for the right reasons, and people value that. Here, for example, at Fir Park, fans have organised suicide awareness or suicide prevention evenings where we talk about addiction issues, we talk about mental health, and we bring in professionals to actually speak about how is best to tackle that and how is best to work on that together. I think it's very, very important to have a community of people that you can speak to. There's been banners at games basically telling people that you're not alone. You know, it's important to be heard and to speak up, and that there's always going to be someone there for you. Some excellent initiatives for people to turn to, and it's so important that the club and their supporters, you know, use their platform to highlight that.
I would never have expected that to be met with such a compassionate response. I think social media can be used for the wrong reasons sometimes, to kind of maybe push a certain narrative, to fund something, to make you look better, but that was never the case for Motherwell. Start to finish felt genuine. It never once felt to me like I was a part of something to fund a bigger picture, to fund Motherwell Football Club as a we're doing this and this makes us look good. It never felt like that. It genuinely felt like we're Motherwell Football Club and we're about the community, but there was a bigger picture for me. I can play a really big role in trying to spark positive change within the community and speaking about such a difficult topic in mental health and suicide prevention and suicide awareness. I'd done it because that was the turning point. It was, I can help people here. I'd received a lot of messages before when I was in hospital and I was really sharing my story and I was using social media to share my story, but when that video came out, that happened tenfold. So it is quite nice to know that yourself within something so much bigger than you, that you've played a small part in helping other people also.
We're open to everyone through that power of football, through that football somewhere you can belong, Fir Park somewhere you can belong, and most of what we do is based at Fir Park. That's what makes our community trust, I believe, better than most in Scotland, because we have that real genuine sense of community. A lot of the people we work with are deemed hard to reach. Well, they're hard to reach for a reason, but it's easier for us to reach them. You look at any programme, and the most difficult demographic to engage are men aged 25 to 45. Well, that tends to be our core audience for 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon. So we have that chance, we have that opportunity. For me, Motherwell matters. For me, this football club matters, and the people in this community matter. There's a buy-in across the whole club for community, whether that's the first team, whether it's the women's team, whether it's the commercial department. It's everyone needs to fight for that goal. It's football brings people together, and it absolutely does, because it evokes passion, it evokes opinions. Everyone wants to be part of it. We get funded because people know that football breaks down those barriers. You're welcome here, you belong here. And that's important, and that is the power of football, that's the power of sport.
Whether it be tackling food poverty, mental health, homelessness, social isolation and addiction, football clubs and football supporters have united behind their local communities. Football has stepped in to fill the void that needs to be addressed by the local and national governments. Yet, the breakdown of social barriers through football is still not fairly reflected in the common narrative and perceptions of football supporters in wider society. The insight from Jack, Connor, Don, Liam and Derek demonstrates that despite the collective force of football fan activism uniting communities across Scotland, there will continue to be an ongoing struggle to challenge the stereotypes of a football fan.